Time for us to head over for some motivation from our resident motivation specialist, Mr. Jabu Zwane.
Hi, good evening. Welcome to Monday Motivation. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening. Yes, we are talking politics and we are talking all things important to our country, the GNU, the GPU. And hopefully tonight we can get your spirits up and then you can have a more positive approach to all the things that are happening in the country. This evening, I want to talk about something that's very important that comes a lot in my interactions with many adults, with many people in my clients, and many spaces, and that is how do I become a great communicator? But before I get into that, honestly, I want to talk about if communication is such a simple and easy way of talking, or rather speaking, rather, is such an easy way of communicating, how come so many of us as adults actually struggle with it? And I think really the answer lies with our foundational structures. Recently, I did a video online where I talked about the importance of adults speaking to their children like adults, allowing them to speak and complete their sentences without being interrupted, without being assisted, or without being condemned for not being able to articulate their thoughts correctly. Because you see, that's actually where it starts. It starts off with those foundational structures of authority that were supposed to help us to learn how to communicate, not allowing us the space to learn how to communicate and creating tension and creating unhealthy environments or unsafe environments for us to communicate. And there is a point where we learn that communication actually is somewhat of a burden. And then you see this will happen. You see this with many kids that, for example, when they're being asked questions, they start to stutter, they start to stumble over their words, they start to go softer, they don't even look parents in the eye, and they start maybe even getting distracted and start talking about something else. But tonight, hopefully, even as adults, maybe we'll learn some crucial tips on how we can do that. And I want to start off with a bit of a mindset framing. And the framework that I normally use starts off with understanding, first of all, the narrative. And then the narrative is really understanding your own background and that the fact that whoever you're talking to also has a background. So in understanding that in the background, we don't all have the same culture, we don't all have the same family, not the same language, not the same experiences. Even though we may grow up even in the same township or even in the same household, we didn't have the same experience because even as siblings, we are being parented by the same people in body, but we are being parented by different people at different life stages. And our own experience of the parenting will be completely different. The firstborn experiences their parents differently from a secondborn and a thirdborn, purely because of what I've just mentioned now about life stages. And so it's important to understand whenever you're coming to communicate with anybody or in any environment, whether it's an audience, whether it's one-on-one, people have backgrounds in the same way that you have a background, and that is basically your narrative. The second thing is about context. So when you're communicating in whatever environment, what is the actual event around which you're communicating? Are you talking to address a problem? Are you talking to deliver an important message? Are you talking to deliver a solution, for example? Having to articulate a problem is different from having to articulate a solution. And so that is really important to the context. And then on top of that, is it safe? Is it loud? Is it quiet? Is it busy as you're communicating? How are you feeling mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically speaking? Because that's part of the context as well. And also the person you're communicating to, how are they feeling when you're having to have a very important conversation, let's say with your wife, but she's tired and she's frustrated, but then you're insisting that you want to have the conversation right there and then. That context can really compromise the quality of that conversation, and in the end, end up doing the worst instead of actually helping you in your own goal to communicate. So context is crucial. The third thing is about the meaning. We all have different meanings, and what contributes to our meanings are the following: our value system, which determines our system of prioritizing what's important, what is not; belief system, whether those are influenced by religion, whether we believe in God, and whether we believe whatever our belief system is, that determines again our meanings. The types of relationships that you've got with the person also determines the meaning. It means something different when somebody that you're close to says to you, I love you, and somebody that is not close to you saying that I love you. That meaning changes because of the relationship. And of course, because of the context. There's so many other things like principles and your attitude. And even in that moment, as you are communicating, what is your goal? What is your desire? What is it that you're trying to achieve as you're communicating? And then the last thing, of course, it then comes down to interpretation. And all of those factors determine then how you interpret what is being communicated based on your own narrative, based on the context of the conversation, and then based on the meanings that you are busy allocating and attaching to the conversation, and then lastly, interpreting. For example, your position in the conversation, whether you're communicating as a parent, as a lover, as a leader, as a follower, as somebody that has leverage, all those factors, again, affect. And so then it is very important to understand in your communication what's your position, and hopefully that helps. So that's the framework. And then I want to share with you a very simple framework that I personally use to help people with communication. The first one is that these are the things that we need to avoid, right? And avoiding is flaws, FALAWS, flaws. So the first one is that false assumptions. If you have false assumptions based on your narrative, you're going to have a wrong context, and then you're also going to have a wrong interpretation. So if you have false assumptions in your conversation, you're going to come to wrong conclusions, because false assumptions also lead your questions. And if you're asking the wrong questions based on false assumptions, then you're going to get wrong answers, which in the end are going to lead to you making the wrong decisions and then actually having the wrong outcome. In other words, having the wrong interpretation. So it is important that you interrogate the assumption that you have as you are communicating with people, because that is going to determine, again, how you ask questions. And secondly is a lack of empathy. And a lack of empathy, we see it a lot in many of these conversations, right? Right now in the world, there's so many camps because people have wrong assumptions based on their own desires, based on their own belief systems, based on their own backgrounds, based on whatever information that they've received. And because of that, they're asking the wrong questions, they're getting the wrong answers, they come to the wrong conclusions. And as a result, it's very difficult right now in the world for many people to find a common place because of that. Unfortunately, also that leads to a lack of empathy, which means that an inability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, to experience the difficulty that they're going through as a human being. And then that way, then you are able to regulate yourself, even if you're frustrated or angry. But if you understand somebody's position, you find that you can better handle your frustrations. And then thirdly is the L, right? FLA. The L is attacking responses. Wrong assumptions and lack of empathy always leads to attacking. It leads to self-defense. It leads to self-justification. It leads to not allowing the person to speak and not hearing their voice. And then the fourth thing is wandering focus. If you have the wrong assumptions, you obviously have a wrong focus altogether, because you're looking over there and talking about that, while someone else is looking over there and talking about that. And so then you have a very split focus, or you are distracted. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're not in the right frame of mind psychologically for you to engage in. Perhaps you need to take a break instead of trying to engage in something very difficult in that moment. And then lastly, that you want to avoid is that you want to speak. You want to avoid speaking over other people, meaning interrupting people, right? And when you have a lack of empathy, a lot of speaking over people, interruption happens, because most of the time we lack empathy due to judgment. When we are busy judging people, it's very difficult to feel empathy for them. I believe that it was also one of those Mother Teresa that said that it is very difficult to love somebody that you are too busy judging. It's very difficult to love somebody that you're busy judging. It is very difficult to have compassion on somebody that you're too busy judging. It's very, very important. So flaws, meaning avoid false accusations, avoid lack of empathy, avoid attacking responses, avoid wandering focus, and lastly, avoid speaking over others. What must you do then? You ask, great question. Here are the 5 things that you've got to do. The first one is that it's important to learn to connect emotionally. Right? We are very emotional beings. And one of the ways that we connect emotionally is that we put down the walls when we are having a conversation. How do you put down the walls? You must assume no malice when you're having tough conversations. And then by assuming no malice, that you remove your own predispositions and false assumptions, and then you try to listen with an intent to understand rather than with an intent to respond. And this allows you some room and creates a less hostile environment, even in very difficult conversations. And so connect emotionally, build that rapport, and then acknowledge someone else's great points as they're communicating, as opposed to overlooking their good points and only focusing on the wrong thing that they're saying or whatever they say that you don't agree with. Secondly, listen actively. And yet, listening actively is that you really intend to listen, not just to hear the words being spoken, but to really understand from which point the person is coming from, and then engage with questions. So rather than being reactive and defensive and just self-justifying, ask curious questions. What do you mean by this? Is this what you mean by that? Okay, I don't understand it when you say, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you mind elaborating? And one of the habits that I have is that when somebody says to me, "Do you understand what I mean?" I always say, "I think I do, but just in case I'm unclear, do you mind just elaborating further for me?" And then that always I see that most times people welcome an opportunity to clarify and to elaborate further, especially when you're having a high stakes negotiation or some kind of a conflict or some kind of important negotiation. So engaging with questions, curious questions, asking questions rather than questioning questions, right? Questioning questions, they're questioning somebody's character. They're questioning somebody's motive, questioning somebody's intentions. Now, and these are types of questions, for example, in the court of law. I'm sure when you've watched television, you've seen this, where the defense attorney or whoever it is on the opposing side will say, "Leading, Your Honor," when the other attorney asks the questions, because then the attorney is asking with a leading question because they are looking for a specific answer. That's what we call narrative questioning. And unfortunately, today, even in journalism, we have too much of that, as opposed to having journalists that ask objective, open questions that are actually asked with the intention to close the gaps in understanding and knowledge. They dishonor the integrity of questions by asking or leading questions or creating narratives with their statements and then asking the question because they're looking for a specific answer. They're not looking necessarily for the truth. So the narrative questioning is very much based on bias, very much based on a position that one has already taken, and then which leaves very little room then for you to become a great communicator, especially in very tense environments. And then lastly is that adjust to feedback. So once somebody has given you feedback, it's important not to so much focus on defending your intention, rather to actually engage that feedback. Ask more questions, ask more clarifying questions so that you can, again, engage more objectively. And then lastly, it's important that you respond clearly, that you really craft your responses very clearly. So what this basically means is that I always say this to my students when I'm teaching communication. It is important to have a clear purpose. What is that you're trying to achieve in the conversation? What are you trying to understand? What problems are you trying to solve? What solution are you trying to communicate? What outcomes do you want to have? Like, there's got to be have a very clear one. And then lastly, what happens is that once you've got that, is that you have to then formulate your thoughts. And once you formulate your thoughts, it's important then to deliver and to say what you need to say with confidence. Say it confidently. Say it well. Say it well. And so that last acronym then is clear, right? First one is that connect emotionally, listen actively, engage with questions, adjust to feedback, and then lastly respond clear. So that's basically what I wanted to just share with you guys tonight, is that it's very, very important to understand that whenever we're having a conversation, whenever we're communicating, there is a narrative. There is a narrative. All of us have some kind of a narrative. There is a context. There are meanings that we already have. And then when we come to interpretation, let's make sure that we are not biased in any way. We're not focused on one particular way of thinking or direction in any way, but we are quite intentional to ensure that we create a common ground. And in creating common ground, we ask questions where we need clarity. We ask with an intention to fill in the gaps in our understanding rather than having pretext. And the pretext are those pretexted ideas where you don't necessarily, you already know what you want to be said. And then you pretext your question because you're trying to create a specific narrative. And then, of course, as I've mentioned, it's important to have empathy because communication is really crucial for us as adults. Great communicators who are adults have a higher likelihood of success. They are more potentially, they are seen as having, as likely to be leaders. They're more likely to be, they're more likely to succeed in life. They seem more intelligent. And of course, they seem more confident. And of course, more confident people seem to be more persuasive. So much more to be said. I want to thank you so much for tuning in this evening. I hope you've learned something, and hopefully it's something you can be able to use in your day-to-day, in your work, in your personal life. My name is Jabu Zwane. Thank you so much for tuning in. Do enjoy the rest of your programming and the rest of your week. Good evening.